Hello and welcome back to my channel where I talk about books. Books I've read, books I've loved, books that have stayed in my collection forever, my favourites. Um, Last night at book club, we talked a little bit about Roald Dahl. We got to the subject of Dahl via that terrible film Wonka, um, and got onto his spooky, creepy stories, the Tales of the Unexpected. And Caroline mentioned there was a story about roses screaming when they were cut, and I can't remember which one it is. So this is my copy that my friend Jake bought me years ago, maybe 20 years ago. I've got lots of copies of Dahl's stories. I've got the individual volumes. I've got a collected stories somewhere that's kind of too heavy to carry about. But this is perfect because this included all the stories that were filmed for the TV. I'd love to find out which one it was. It was about the roses. Anyway, if anybody knows which it was, please let me know in the comments below. Right, so Roald Dahl. I've always been a fan, going back to um, probably being about 6 or 7 and reading him at school. I was a 70s kid, so we had um, we had Roald Dahl and we had Doctor Who books and Enid Blyton, and that was mostly it. I hope you've got a cup of tea. Okay, this is something that I found and read last year from the 90s, which I'm just kind of realizing was a kind of a golden age for middle grade fiction, for science fiction, for all sorts of things. Looking back, I was in my 20s and I was reading literary fiction mostly, and queer fiction, and I well, I suppose I went back to middle grade fiction in a way, but I wasn't always following what was coming out. I mean, I followed the obvious things. I read um, uh, what's he called? Philip Pullman. I read that trilogy when it came out. I read David Allman's Skellig because I know David and I followed his short fiction for adults before then. And suddenly he had this monster hit with Skellig, and that was a big deal for kids' books. And I read Harry Potter when it came out. But I wasn't following all of it. I followed some of it through my sister, who was 17 years younger, is 17 years younger. And so I read Goosebumps to her. I read various new things coming out at that point. Judy Corballis was a favorite of both mine and my sister's. And I read all of her books to her. Philip Ridley as well. There was lots going on in the 90s. But I wasn't aware of Maggie Prince, published by Dolphin in the mid 90s. Now, this is a kind of man who fell to earth story, kind of a Tomorrow People kind of story for early teen readers, I would say. But it's brilliantly done. It really is like the Tomorrow People, with chosen children being zoomed off into space and having interstellar adventures and being back by morning. But also this sense of impending apocalypse. There's a bit where they think nuclear war is going to happen towards the end of this, which is really frightening, where they come out of the supermarket and think the mushroom cloud's gone up and they have to get to shelter. Very frightening and real, and the kind of thing that kids of that era, I remember in the 80s, we talked about all the time. What would happen? Where would you go? Dreadful, but fantastic, fantastic book. And there's a sequel apparently, so I must find that. So Maggie Prince, Memoirs of a Dangerous Alien. Something you can't get now unless you find it secondhand, but I would definitely seek it out if you can. Now, this is something I read maybe 10 years ago for the first time. Anti-Mame by Patrick Dennis, urged on by a friend who was very into the musical version. This is 2010. I read this, and I remember sitting in a deli around the corner, Pod Deli, for hours reading this. It's one of the funniest books. One of the things that came up in book club last night was about books that make you laugh. And actually, it's quite hard to think of books that have made you laugh out loud. People said Terry Pratchett never made me laugh. I'm afraid. Douglas Adams did. Map and Lucia does so does Woodhouse, but nobody had read them, um, which we need to remedy. Um, and then Paddington, and Paddington was kind of looked at dimly by some people in the book club who just thought Paddington was twee, which is bollocks. He's acerbic, he's sardonic, he's hilarious. And in fact, in this pile of books that I've just sifted out to show you today, I have some of my um, beautiful Paddington hardbacks. And I love them. Some of them I've had for years, some of them I had to go searching for online and paying over the odds, I'm afraid. Paddington at Large, look. And to me, and I can't, and the Blue Peter one, which these were stories from the Blue Peter Annual, so they were collected together latterly. I wasn't aware of them until quite recently, but it meant that there were extra volumes of Paddington. Everything about these books is brilliant. There's slapstick. There's somebody muddling along, getting it wrong, but eventually getting it right, trying his best, giving people hard stares, spending his pocket money wisely, and just trundling along, exposing frauds and shysters and bullies without even realizing that's what he's doing. Paddington stays true to himself, and he kind of, yeah, he bumbles along through life, having quite a nice time, but having no truck with the baddies, who will always expose themselves in the end for what they are. So, to me, that sounds quite moralizing, but it's not. They're very, very funny stories, and I just always loved them. And I was shocked to find that some people hadn't read them or thought they might be twee. Even Winnie the Pooh's not twee, really. It's the gubbins around these things that's twee. It's the merchandise. It's the adaptations. It's the things that sugarcoat them. Actually, like Mary Poppins, you read the book and she's a salty old mare. Really, she's quite difficult. She's not Julie Andrews. They do that again and again to kids' books. Kids love characters who are spiky and weird, like Wurzel Gummidge's in the books, or like Mary Poppins, or like Paddington. But by the time film and TV get their hands on them, they spoil it. Anyway, I was talking about Auntie Mame. That's hilarious. Very queer, very New Yorky, very every gay boy's idea of what it's like to have an eccentric auntie who will show him the town and a good time and have a laugh with. That's Auntie Mame. Now, here's someone. I haven't read this book for a long time. 98. Julia Darling, her first novel, Crocodile Soup. Now, in these videos, I've mentioned Julia quite a lot. She's a bit of a heroine of mine. She died in 2005, and I knew her slightly. I'd been to Tyneside and been back to it for a festival that she organised. And I love her poetry, I love her short stories, and her novel is compendious and magical realist and magical, really, just in itself. This came out while I was still at UEA. I remember. It's funny seeing the people that she thanks, because lots of these people I know from different things, the kind of Tyneside writers that I met over the years, they always seemed like a lovely, cohesive bunch that looked after each other. And I always felt slightly envious because although I come from there, I never lived there as an adult, and I never took part in their kind of literary world, didn't live amongst it. And I've not really found that in the Northwest, unfortunately. I've not found the same kind of literary family, apart from the ones I've made for myself, amongst friends of mine and writers I know. But that kind of, yeah, kind of arts council-y, whatever world. W.G. Sebald, The Rings of Saturn, which is part memoir, part travelogue, part photography book, part historical novel and historical non-fiction piece about walking through landscapes and telling stories and stories within stories and tangents. Um, that's right. There's lots about silkworms in this and the way the pattern on silk goes. And I remember um, thinking that's the way this. You look at the book at this in this light, and it's this color, but you turn it this way, and it's a different color. Just the way that is it slubbed silk works. It's different in different lights, and I think Sebald's work is like that. He was really taken up and lionized, and I keep doing something to my mic. I hope I've not buggered the sound. Yeah, and he worked in our department downstairs in European Studies at UEA, and suddenly he was world famous. Susan Sontag had reviewed him. He was everywhere, and he went around the world in his 50s, being lionized, being famous. And of course, by the time he got back, um, UEA was treating him a lot better, and so he was very happy. He suddenly went round in this um, peacock silk uh, waistcoat, I remember. And he died young. He died terribly young in a car accident um, in about 2001. But for a few years, he was our colleague on the MA in fiction and various things, and he was a great person to have around, and amazing to watch someone being uh, as famous as he was, and to watch people fling themselves under him, all these absolute, sycophants, really. Yeah, it was funny. And he was very acerbic about all of that. I remember him saying about one very famous woman who came to prostrate herself before the great writer. He hid in the bar upstairs of a place and went, "Don't let that woman anywhere near me. Protect me from that woman." He was very funny in that kind of very dry German way. Right, what else? Mental, a book of essays by Eric, is it Sarfati, I think? Now, he was a writer I met in New York I met him through Bob Smith, the novelist, and they were in a writing gang that I was invited to to meet when I was there briefly in 2011. They were Bob and Eddie, both coming from a kind of stand-up world. They were comedians, gay comedians, very, very funny in real life. His essays are smashingly funny. There's one about being part of I think, a theatre troupe in Spain that's extremely funny. It's a few years since I've read it, but every essay is great. It's that kind of world of um, gay memoir that's presented as essays that aren't chronological. It's a very kind of queer with a big Q patterning for a book. Bob did the same thing with his books of essays. They're like stand-up routines, and of course, David Sedaris is the most famous exponent of this kind of this genre, the snappy, wisecracking, but ultimately bittersweet essay. Um, I'll talk about Sedaris some other time. I can just see all of his books. Oddly enough, most of them together. Usually I don't clump books together by authors. As you know, my shelves are more or less random apart from occasional spots of color coordination. But Sedaris is grouped together there, which is telling, I suppose. I think a lot of his work. I think less of it as it goes on, as he just writes about being a famous and successful um, uh, misanthrope. I think that's less interesting than his adventures earlier. But maybe that happens to people when they take off. I don't know. He's still always worth reading. I think Sedaris is brilliant and hilarious. But the earlier stuff was more hilarious. This is what they always say to people who write anything funny at all, isn't it? Your earlier stuff was funnier. This is a great collection of essays. It's a kid's book from the 70s, more famous historical mysteries. I've got the paperback somewhere that's got a fantastic cover. It's a Target book. Anyway, this is something I wish I'd read as a kid. Leonard Gribble is the author, but this has got chapters about really gruesome historical mysteries, the best being Sawney Bean and his secret clan. They were the Scottish cannibals who lived in a cave and just ate everyone who came by. Um, and Amelia Earhart, Anastasia, The Bounty, and The Incredible Affair of the Cock Lane Ghost, which is a mystery that I really like. And I once wrote a story about it for a historical mystery anthology a few years ago. Anyway, I love historical mysteries. Not something I enjoyed so much as a kid, actually, nonfiction and historical stuff. It's taken me a long time to come around to it. I don't know why that is. One of my lights has gone off. My battery must be going. Right, last thing for today. This novel is really funny. That's been the theme, I suppose, apart from the Sawney Bean, the cannibal stuff, um, has been funny stuff. It's been, yeah, the books that make you laugh, perhaps. I should have set about that more programmatically and picked out more because I'm looking at E.F. Benson there and I could have talked about next time. Beaches is one of my favourite movies, the Bette Midler movie. Iris Rayner Dart wrote the novel and its sequel, cunningly known as Beaches 2. It follows much the same story. I think it predates, I think the film is based on this. There's only a couple of years between them, and actually the movie improves on the storytelling in some ways. It's a more elegant shape to the film and irons out some of the clunkinesses of the plotting. But again, who am I to talk? I think a film is a nice extra draft that novels sometimes get to make them stricter in the storytelling sense, perhaps, and this works for that. But there's a charm to this novel. Maybe it's slightly more edgy and dirty than the film. The film, of course, is beautiful and hilarious. I love it, but it's also sentimental, and that's all right. It's camp. The film is a classic, but yes, it's got softer edges. It's an '80s um, female buddy movie in which there's an early tragic death. So of course it's gonna have Bette Midler singing "The Wind Beneath My Wings" and a sunset and stuff. This is more caustic, I think, and sarcastic, and it's about a female friendship in which one becomes famous and the other doesn't. And I think it's a lovely story. Anyway, I will be back soon to talk more books. Click like below. Please leave comments. Um, tell me what Roald Dahl story has the screaming roses, if you know which one. And subscribe and spread the word. Okay, take care. Talk soon. Bye bye.